For hundreds of years, a wild rumor echoed through European palaces and taverns alike. The scandalous tale of a Russian empress so obsessed with pleasure that she supposedly died in a sexual encounter with a horse. You probably heard it. Most people have. But here's what they haven't heard. It's all a lie. This is the story of how propaganda and misogyny twisted the legacy of one of the most powerful women in history, Catherine II of Russia, better known as Catherine the Great. The salacious tales of orgies, harems, and insatiable lust were not born from truth. They were carefully crafted lies, designed to discredit a woman who dared to rule, and rule brilliantly. Behind the myths is not a reckless hedonist, but a visionary leader, a reformer, a builder of empires. The truth, as always, is far more fascinating than the fiction. To understand how this historic smear campaign began, we must go back to her origins. She was born Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst on May 2, 1729, in Stettin, a small town in Prussia. Her father was a minor German prince. No one at the time could have predicted that this clever, bookish girl would one day wear the crown of the Russian Empire. She received a typical noblewoman's education: languages, literature, court etiquette. But behind her polite manners was a deep hunger for knowledge, and something rarer: ambition. In 1744, Sophie, just 15 years old, was selected to marry the heir to the Russian throne, Grand Duke Peter. It was a political arrangement brokered by Empress Elizabeth of Russia. The girl from Prussia traveled to a strange new land, converted to Orthodox Christianity, took the name Catherine, and vowed to become truly Russian. But her husband, Peter, was no Prince Charming. Immature and erratic, he was more obsessed with playing toy soldier and idolizing Frederick of Prussia than fulfilling his royal duties. Their marriage was cold, awkward, and for years unconsummated. All of Russia watched, waiting for an heir, but Catherine was trapped in a loveless union with a man who barely acknowledged her. Isolated in the imperial court, Catherine began building alliances. Her intelligence, grace, and political savvy drew admiration, and inevitably, gossip. Some whispered about her friendships with noblemen. The rumors began. Then came 1762. Empress Elizabeth died, and Peter ascended the throne as Peter III. Within just 6 months, he'd alienated nearly everyone: the nobility, the Orthodox Church, even his own guards. His bizarre policies and pro-Prussian stance outraged the empire. Catherine saw what had to be done. With the support of the imperial guard and powerful allies, she led a coup d'etat. Peter was overthrown, and Catherine took the throne. Not as a regent, not as a placeholder, but as empress in her own right. A woman had seized power in the world's largest empire, and that, more than anything, terrified Europe. Unable to accept a powerful woman on the throne, foreign courts, especially in France and England, launched a smear campaign. If they couldn't challenge her politically, they would attack her personally. First came the accusation that she'd murdered her husband. Though Peter died under suspicious circumstances after the coup, likely from a scuffle with guards, Catherine's enemies insisted she'd ordered or even committed the murder herself. Then came the avalanche of sexual slander. They said she kept a harem of young lovers, that her palace hosted orgies, that her appetite for men was uncontrollable, and of course the infamous story of her alleged death by horse, a story so absurd It's almost laughable. Almost. These were not harmless rumors. They were weapons, sharpened with misogyny and aimed at her legacy. But what's the truth? Catherine did have romantic relationships. She was a widow in all but name and a monarch without a consort. Her emotional and political needs were real. In 34 years on the throne, she had around 12 known lovers. 12. Over 3 decades. That's one relationship every 3 years. Not exactly the behavior of someone insatiable. Compare that to male monarchs of the era, like Louis XIV of France, who had countless mistresses and was praised for it. Catherine's lovers, including military leader Grigory Orlov and political advisor Grigory Potemkin, weren't toys. They were trusted allies and partners in governance. Yet the myths persisted. The horse story? It was invented long after her death, likely by French or British propagandists looking to ridicule her legacy. In reality, Catherine died on November 17, 1796, of a stroke at the age of 67, quietly in her palace, surrounded by her court. While the world gossiped, Catherine built a legacy. She expanded Russian territory, conquered Crimea, opened ports on the Black Sea, and transformed Russia into a major European power. She reformed the legal system, corresponded with Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Diderot, and promoted education, especially for women. She founded hospitals, abolished torture, and modernized the empire's administration. She built the Hermitage, now one of the greatest museums in the world. She was a patron of the arts, a philosopher queen, a masterful diplomat. But none of this was what her enemies talked about. They preferred salacious lies, and it worked. For centuries, history books repeated these myths unchallenged. Even serious historians bought into the scandal, until recent decades when scholars began to re-examine the facts. What they found was a calculated campaign to destroy a woman who had dared to rule like a man, and outshine most of them in the process. Catherine the Great was not a nymphomaniac. She was a revolutionary. She proved that a woman could rule with brilliance, strength, and vision, that she could navigate politics, war, diplomacy, and reform, and leave behind a stronger nation than she inherited. Her real offense wasn't her love life. It was her power. Her story reminds us that misogyny in history isn't just about oppression, it's about erasure. Powerful women are so often reduced to caricatures, their achievements ignored, their reputations distorted. But today, we know better. Catherine the Great was not the woman her enemies described. She was far more dangerous than that. She was competent, she was brilliant, and she was in control. And that, in the eyes of many men at the time, was the greatest scandal of all.